Welcome to the Mondo Weiss podcast. I'm your host, Dave Reed. At Mondo Weiss, we cover the movements, activists, and policymakers who affect the struggle for freedom in Palestine. In this episode, I talked to Nooran Alhamdan, a recent master's graduate of Georgetown University, about the action she and other graduates took to confront Antony Blinken, the U.S. Secretary of State, over U.S. support for Israel. The audio in this episode is a little bit choppy, so thank you for your patience. 10 days after Israeli soldiers murdered Al Jazeera's veteran correspondent Shireen Abu Akleh, graduating students at Georgetown University confronted the U.S. Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, over her death. Multiple students displayed photos of the slain Palestinian-American journalist. Graduate Nooran Alhamdan refused to shake Blinken's hand as she walked across the stage, speaking to him directly. Nooran joins us today to talk about their protest action at the Georgetown commencement ceremony. Nooran, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Dave.
Well, first of all, congratulations on your recent graduation. Before we get into your protest and interaction with the U.S. Secretary of State, tell us a little bit about your background and what your master's work was in.
Yeah, so I just recently graduated from the Master's in Arab Studies program at Georgetown University. It is connected to the Center for Contemporary Arab Studies. The center actually was founded by several Arab academics, including two very well-known Palestinian academics, Hanna Batatu and Hisham Sharabi, who are kind of known for being kind of in line with Edward Said and other, radical academics of that time, centering most of their work on Palestine and the Palestinian question. And so, I just graduated from this program. I care deeply about the Arab world. That was the major reason why I felt like I wanted to pursue a master's degree, specializing in the region. And most of my work for the past 2 years has focused on transitional justice in Palestine, the Palestinian refugee question, and more recently, actually, the question of Palestinian speech online, and how the intersections of the digital world and the real world when it comes to Palestinians are actually coming to create a lot of problems when it comes to silencing Palestinian speech and other issues surrounding that. So,
Georgetown University is a central training ground of U.S. Foreign Service personnel, and today's graduates will be influencing U.S. foreign policy in the years and decades to come. What would you say the current discourse is like around Palestine by faculty within the institution? And is that mirrored by the student body, or are there differences?
So I can't speak for the undergraduate experience at Georgetown, although I interacted heavily with the Students for Justice in Palestine student organization on campus that was comprised mainly of undergraduate students. And I think Georgetown, like any other institution, is a mixed bag, but in terms of the higher echelons of power, you see a lot of pro-Israel sympathies, and that's kind of expected, especially given Georgetown's point in terms of foreign service and international relations. So, for example, in the Center for Contemporary Arab Studies, I would say the vast majority of professors are very intensely pro-Palestine. There was a lot of support for really any work that was done relating to BDS or Sheikh Jarrah from these faculty members and professors. I know that the Peace and Justice Studies department as well is very pro-Palestine. And so you kind of have like a scattered situation of there are faculty members who are very supportive of students, but at the same time, like Georgetown is a place that hires like visiting professors who deny that Palestinian refugees even exist, or have professors who are former Israeli ambassadors. So it's unfortunate that this is kind of the way the institution is, where you'll find the support if you are a pro-Palestinian or Palestinian student for sure. But in terms of having to deal with the fact that the institution definitely is in line basically with the general US foreign policy establishment, that's like a harder question to solve. And that's kind of like the layout of the land on campus.
In your article for 972 magazine, and we'll link to that in the show notes, You said that you started talking to your peers about protesting Blinken's appearance at your graduation before Shireen Abu Akleh was murdered by Israeli soldiers. How did her killing and the subsequent attack on her funeral procession affect you and your colleagues?
Yeah, so obviously the murder of Shireen was very difficult for most people to take in. She is an icon. If you have watched, Al Jazeera growing up, which I definitely did, you knew who she was. And I just think the way in which she was murdered too was shocking. I mean, nothing about Israel's brutality should be surprising, but it still is when you're confronted with the fact that like this woman was shot literally wearing a press vest with a helmet on. There's other videos that have emerged where you can see the situation was so calm and normal, prior to the shooting. It's just like daunting and horrifying. And I can't imagine what her family is going through. In terms of our planning, so we were obviously impacted by Shireen's death, but I think it is important to note that we were planning to protest Blinken even prior to that. There's a lot of issues that should be focused on. For example, the ethnic cleansing of over 1,000 Palestinians in Masafar Yatta, or what's continually happening in Sheikh Jarrah and other Jerusalem neighborhoods, or the 15-year blockade on the Gaza Strip, or the fact that Palestinian refugees are still languishing in camps all over the Arab world, and their rights at this point are not even on the table when we talk about what's happening in Palestine. And so for us, it wasn't just, this world event has happened. It just so happened that in our planning, Shireen was murdered. And my peers and I felt like if this does not encompass all the other issues that we're discussing, then I don't know what else does. Because Shireen was reporting on those other issues. She spent her whole life reporting on what was happening in Palestine. And so while she really became the face of the protest, I'd like to say more that she was the compass of it, because she points to everything else that was happening in Palestine and continues to happen. And so when we shifted gears, it wasn't necessarily that, we want to take advantage of the fact that this is a trending situation. It wasn't really like that at all. For us, it was more like she represents everything else that we were considering when we were planning our protest. And if you see in the posters that we held of her, they even say resistance until liberation and return. So to show you that we were connecting Shireen to the bigger question of Palestinian resistance, Palestinian liberation, and the inevitable return of Palestinian refugees. I'll end on this note that the scenes of Shireen's funeral were just so horrifying. I think that was really the day that the planning got kickstarted in a way that, made our previous days of discussing the situation look very like juvenile. Like watching the scenes of her funeral, really like I just in death, even Israel cannot like let this woman rest in peace. And again, it's not just her. How many Palestinian bodies are being held by Tel Aviv University right now? How many Palestinians, like the Israelis had the audacity to say, oh my God, they buried her so quickly. Like, yeah, who would trust the body of their loved one with the Israelis? Like, I just think that witnessing the scenes that day really for me cemented that like what we were doing was right. And like, no matter the consequence, it would be worth it because this was like larger than us. And it was really like the best chance we had at making sure that the Georgetown community, the US foreign policy establishment that would be present at commencement would hear what we had to say about this.
So tell us about how the ceremony and your action unfolded that day.
To give maybe some more background, like I didn't tell my parents that I was doing this. They flew in and were expecting a pretty normal graduation. I personally felt like they have the right, obviously, to be very worried because Palestinians in this country are very routinely like punished for speaking out about Palestine or engaging in public acts of awareness or resistance at the smallest level. And so my day of graduation was in fact very hectic. I remember like rushing around, like grabbing pastries for my family so they could like have a fast like breakfast. And I think it hit like 2 p.m. And we were expected to be in the room that, us, like our cohort was supposed to meet in for graduation by like 3:45. So I'm sitting there and doing the math on like the traffic and getting ready. And I basically forced everyone to get there like very early. And so I arrive on campus and I have already printed out the posters of Shireen. I had done that a few days before. So I had them with me. I had my kufiya. And I basically enter this room that me and my cohort are supposed to meet in so we can be arranged in alphabetical order and line up correctly. And I just start handing out the posters. And for us, it was a situation where we wanted the most amount of people to feel comfortable participating in this action. And so a lot of people online were like, why are some people, participating and some aren't? It really varied. And you have to remember, some people have maybe citizenship, like in Arab countries where free speech on the Palestinian issue is not necessarily encouraged, and they worried for their safety, rightfully. There were other folks in the cohort who are here on student visas and didn't want to jeopardize that. So we really thought, like, how can we get everyone involved? And the best way was the kufiyas and the posters. So some people were wearing the kufiyas, some people were wearing it and holding the posters, and that was the best way we could get everyone involved. And so we're lined up and the procession is about to start, and we were right in the front. Now that is something I would not have anticipated. Like, someone told me that in passing like a few days before, someone who had gone to Georgetown for undergrad, and they were like, usually the master's students are up in the front, and then because Arab studies starts with an A, it's like literally the first one. And so we were literally the first line of students in the master's procession line. And we just walk into the procession and we hold up our posters, and I can see people kind of reading them and taking photos of them. And I think in that moment, we still didn't understand that, like, what we were doing was going to go viral. Like none of us had that expectation whatsoever. Like, our goal was simply to send a message to Blinken, and if photos happened to be taken, they would be taken, but we didn't expect that they would be taken in the capacity that they were. And so we get to our line of seats. Again, we are right in the front. Like, I'm telling you, we are the first and second row right in front of the stage. And so when Blinken eventually gets to the stage area, he sees our posters. Like, he sees them within the first 30 seconds of walking by us. And I mean, I don't want to like project what I think he was thinking, but I do remember looking at his face and being like, wow, he looks surprised. He it definitely caught him off guard. And so the graduation ceremony begins. You have all of these Georgetown officials speaking. Dean Hellman, he's the dean of the School of Foreign Service, the President DeJoya. And eventually, Secretary Blinken is introduced. And Blinken's speech was frankly terrible. Like, I'm obviously biased because I view like a lot of people rightfully as war criminals, but the majority of his speech was about Madeleine Albright and Colin Powell, his predecessors, and how they paved the way for him, and how students used to reach out to them all the time and they would respond. And it was it was already a situation where I was feeling angry at the injustice and the fact that US officials like Blinken can just prance around and go to graduation ceremonies and act like they aren't deeply involved in a lot of injustice all over the world. But to hear him very openly, like honor, quote unquote, Madeleine Albright and Colin Powell was just disgusting. And again, to me, cemented that we were doing the right thing, because this is someone who's like whitewashing the legacy of people with blood on their hands, and he will also be remembered the same way by me, I'm sure, and generations of students to come. And so he finishes his speech, and this is the moment. Oh, and let me know also that throughout his speech, we were holding his posters. That was the extent of what was planned. The extent of what was planned was that we would hold the posters during the procession, and then throughout his speech, we would hold the posters up. And so we held them up the entire time. Thankfully, no one from like Georgetown told us to put them down or anything. like what we were doing was actually completely in line with Georgetown's like freedom of speech protocols. So I would have been very surprised if someone told us to put them down. And so we were holding them up the whole time. He definitely looked over a few times at us, but for the most part, he stayed focused on his speech. And this is the part where it gets, completely unplanned. And I have to note that because a lot of people have been saying, was her refusal to shake his hand like a photo op, etc. But like truly, none of us could have anticipated this. My peers and I operated on the assumption that Blinken would leave. And we had talked to people who had been through Georgetown commencement ceremonies before, and they all told us that usually, when it's a high-level speaker like this, they say what they have to say and they leave because like they're supposedly important and have important things to do. And so that's the basis that we were operating on. And lo and behold, Blinken actually takes a seat back like on the stage, and we're all just surprised that it looks like he's going to stay. And if we knew that he was going to be there for the entire graduation ceremony, we definitely would have done more. Like we definitely would have at least passed him letters. Well, we could not have expected that he was going to stick around. And so again, we're the first people sitting in the whole master's like section. So they make us stand up and we're on our way, we're lined up to the stage. And I made really the second decision that I'm not gonna, the expectation was for us to like fist bump him. And I was like, I'm not going to do that. We also like figured out like very like within 30 seconds of realizing he was going to stay on stage, we realized that that information was withheld from us. Because we were just told, in that like prior setting of like us being there early and lining up alphabetically, etc. We were just told that you're going to get your diploma from the dean, you're going to fist bump the director, the quote unquote director, this vague person, and you're going to shake the hand of the president. And so it then made sense that the quote unquote director was Blinken, and I'm not sure why.
That's his code. That's his. That was his official government code name that day. The director.
I guess that was the code name, and it was a bit. I was just surprised again, but I'm sure that this was like a conscious decision on some level by the university to just like not make it very obvious that he's the person who would be on stage, and so. Two of my peers walked before me. I'm sure they were blindsided by the fact that he was the one standing there. And I happened to have a Palestinian flag. It actually wasn't even mine. It was a friend of mine's who's in my cohort, not even of Arab background, like actually just like a white man from Middle America who's just pro-Palestine and had a flag. And for myself, I kind of I saw the flag and I was like, could I borrow that? Like I had walked with a flag for my undergraduate degree. Like I did the same thing. That one obviously did not go viral or anything, but for me, it was just the tradition of this is something I would like to do. I've also had a lot of Palestinian friends who have graduated in the past like week or two who had also carried the flag. So for me, it was just like everyone else is doing this and I've done it before, so I want to do it again. So when I'm standing there and I realize I'm going to walk the stage, for me, it was even more important. Like, wow, I'm about to raise the flag, the Palestinian flag, like to the face of a very important U.S. official. And in that moment, I was like, I have to send him a message. Like, it's not going to be enough to like not fist bump him. It has to also be like me telling him exactly why we're doing what we're doing. So I get my fake, it's not a real diploma, they just give you like a rolled up piece of paper. I get my like, fake diploma from Dean Holman. And as I'm walking by Secretary of State Blinken, and I believe you can see this in the videos, like you see me shaking my head. I look a lot angrier in the videos than I felt in that moment, to be honest, because in that moment, I didn't really feel that angry. I was more just walking towards him and I could even like feel my voice shaking a little bit. But all I said to him, I only had time to say two things. And they were, we demand an independent investigation of Shireen Abu Akleh's murder. And we demand an end to all American aid to the Israeli military. And so when you see me walking towards him, shaking my head, that's what I'm saying. And I don't recall what his response was. It was like a one-word answer, though. It might have been like, all right, okay, something like that. And I shake President DeJoya's hand, who, by the way, actually posted on Facebook a few days prior about Shireen Abu Akleh, and his post was pretty decent for the president of a major university. He even said that she was murdered by Israeli forces. So it was definitely, for me, it was definitely like I'm shaking his hand. And then I get hooded for my master's degree, and I'm off the stage, and that's it. And we go back, we sit down. The rest of the commencement ceremony goes on. They do this for the rest of the master's students and all of the undergrads.
Let me interrupt. Let me ask, did anybody else follow your lead? Anyone else participating? Do you know?
I do not believe, not to my knowledge, but I will also say again that we were truly blindsided. And people, like, I do not, like, I love my peers who I graduated with. Like, they are all very for the Palestinian cause. Like, they know what is right in their hearts. And I just think that had it been planned prior, a lot of people would have not fist bumped him or whatever. But it was just the kind of situation where people didn't have the direction as to what to do. And so I don't really like blame anyone for not like choosing to make that split second decision. I will say though that a few folks in my cohort have like talked to me after the fact and said that like had we known, they also would have bypassed him. So it truly wasn't just like me and like making this like lone decision and everyone else would have disagreed with it or anything. But yes, to like kind of get to the end of the commencement ceremony, towards the end, they do it the inverse, right? So it's not the people who started the procession who walk out first. It's like the stage folks, the important, professors, including Blinken, who walk off the stage first. And Blinken, before he exits the stage, he does like a finger point at me. He like looks me in the eye and he kind of does a like, stay where you are. And I believe you can actually see this in the official like Georgetown SFS commencement video on YouTube. If you scroll far enough, you can see him do that. And so I'm surprised because that like, what does that mean? Like I guess he wants to talk to us. And so he gets off the stage and he walks up to me. And I think he walks up to me because I'm the person who said something to him on stage. But it's very clear that he's like kind of addressing all of us, like everyone in my cohort. And the first thing he says is, "I see you and I hear you." And I mean, I didn't like know what to say in that moment because it was giving, I don't know, like superficial, like US diplomat turned like therapist almost. I was like, what is this supposed to be? He says that, and my exact words were like, "Thank you, but we still demand this independent investigation. Like this woman was murdered. It's like not right that like the United States is not doing anything about this." And his response to that was, and this is really like the diplomacy speak jumped out because he goes, "We're committed to finding the truth." And that was a moment, that was, I think, like the moment, to be honest. I've always known this, but I think it's different when you experience it, that American politicians, they know the truth. They know Palestinian grievances are 100% legitimate, but they willingly choose to not do anything about it. And in fact, to aid and abet Israel. And that was like never so present to me as like in that moment when I'm looking, Secretary Blinken in the eyes. And I was pissed off, honestly. Like I really went to 100 because our demand as a cohort for an independent investigation, it's not because we think there's any truth still to be found or that we think that there's still more facts that need to be discovered. Shireen's family themselves are calling for an independent investigation. That's the first reason why we felt it was important to demand it. But the second reason is because that's not how these independent investigations work, right? Like, we need one because it sets in the global legal record all of the Palestinian eyewitness testimony. It sets it in stone. It doesn't go anywhere. And eventually it could be used to hold Israel accountable. Now, when that accountability happens, that's a different question. And I'm not going to be so naive as to say that it'll happen, under Biden administration if we just lobby hard enough. Like I don't believe that per se. but I still think it's important for that reason. And, you know, my exact response to Secretary Blinken, happened very fast, but I told him, we know the truth. Shireen was murdered by the Israeli military that we bankroll. We need to stop giving American aid to Israel. And I say that, and he walks away. So any like hearing, I see you, I hear you, he was doing kind of like was done at that point. And I'm sure part of it was the commencement ceremony just had to get moving, which is like fine. There's a lot of people, Zionist trolls online who are like, she could have debated him. I'm like, it's the middle of a college graduation debate where, but he walks away at that point. So I think it was a mixture of the fact that the ceremony had to get moving on, and also probably his media training of dealing with, folks with activist inclinations told him, probably just walk away. And so he walks away, and me and my peers are just kind of like dumbfounded, like, did that really just happen? At that point, a lot of people are coming up to us and like taking photos of us. And then we just leave the procession, or we leave the ceremony. And as we're leaving the ceremony, we hold up the posters of Shireen as well. And that was really it in terms of the day of graduation. That's everything that happened. And, I went about the rest of my day very normally. I celebrated with my family. And I could not have anticipated that the next day I would like wake up and find the photos and videos of us. It's like all over the place.
Was there any reaction from Georgetown University officials, faculty, whatnot, and other students who were not part of the cohort that actually carried the signs and did this?
So in terms of Georgetown as an institution, I have yet to hear anything. To be honest, it seems like they're acting like nothing happened. I think the Georgetown School of Foreign Service Twitter account tweeted a photo that you could see us and see our posters in, and that photo has since been deleted. It's no longer their account. I saved it immediately. It's actually been like making the rounds everywhere else just because of like my posting of it. But yeah, Georgetown has acted like it hasn't happened. They even made like an 8-minute highlight video of like the commencement ceremony. And it's like truly as if there wasn't, again, we were literally the first row. So like, their editing team had to work really hard to make sure no pictures of the first row were included. I will say that before the ceremony, before the graduation ceremony, someone had emailed the dean of the School of Foreign Service, someone who participated with us, not to snitch or anything, but to ask for a very vague like understanding of the protocols of free speech surrounding the commencement ceremony. The only reason this individual emailed and asked that, and she didn't email the dean, by the way, sorry, I might have misspoken when I said that. She emailed like the lowest person on the food chain in like Georgetown's like public events like segment. Like she like didn't reach out to anyone like important per se. The only reason we wanted to know that, again, was to assess the level of risk for folks who are here in the country on student visas or who are citizens of other countries. Like for us, we just wanted to make sure that like even this very like bare minimum silent expression would not get someone like escorted out, because like there are people who really cannot afford that. And so somehow this very vague email that was just like, could you send me the protocols of XYZ, ended up on the desk of the dean of the School of Foreign Service, Dean Hellman. And he ended up emailing, he kind of connected the dots because the person who asked is affiliated with the Center for Arab Studies. He ended up emailing the director and a few other people at the top of the food chain in the Center for Arab Studies. And it was a pretty vanilla email of like, people have the right to free speech, but people have not had the opportunity to graduate because of COVID. Like, we hope that you can communicate to whoever's planning whatever that like they should be respectful to other students, etc. And I was sent this email, and to be honest, I'm not like, what we were doing was so important, and also what we were doing was so in line with Georgetown's like free speech policies that I was really like, I'm not about to be afraid of this like very vague email address, and I would rather just let them know that it's happening than to be surprised the day of. And for myself, I was also thinking it would be great to have the dean on record, like some interaction with him and I that I could have in writing in case anything did happen on graduation day. I could kind of refer back to it and say like, well, you did not respect our free speech rights then. And so I emailed the dean very directly saying, this is what we're doing. This is important to us. And he responded surprisingly, and I say surprisingly because my understanding is that he's more of a liberal Zionist in terms of his worldview, especially when it comes to Palestine. But he responds back essentially saying, like, I recognize that this is a tough time for Palestinians, and what you're doing sounds exactly in line with Georgetown's free speech protocols, which of course it is. Like, I copy pasted what the protocols said in my prior email. So in terms of the university, I have not seen a response from them besides acting like it didn't happen. But beforehand, they were made aware of the situation, and it didn't seem like they were going to try to stop us.
Yeah. Well, so that's interesting, knowing that you had that communication even with the dean, and going back and how you described that you thought that Secretary Blinken was genuinely surprised, which maybe indicates that nobody had told him, which that's surprising to me.
I think I would agree with you. I think no one told him because, to be quite frank, he is literally the Secretary of State. I am sure he's used to this. My understanding, again, also is that Georgetown has had speakers in the past who solicited or elicited like a protest response. And so maybe the university is just kind of like, we know to expect this and it's not like a big deal. So yeah, but he did seem surprised. And now that you make note of that, like, yeah, it makes sense that they wouldn't have told him beforehand. But yeah, in terms of a university response, that was really it. And in terms of faculty, we've since released a statement as Arab Studies students. I can actually pull it up. And we have had several faculty members sign on to it. The faculty members, of course, from the Center for Arab Studies have been incredibly supportive. And we have other professors who have signed on to it from other departments. And I just think that a lot of people saw what we did at Georgetown and appreciated it. So that to me felt like a win as well, because it means that at least on one college campus here in the US, people can express supporting Palestinians without necessarily the fear that, other students or other professors are going to try to find a way to ruin their lives. And I'm sure those exist at Georgetown, but in terms of actually playing out, I have not seen it or felt it yet. Yet maybe is the key word.
Yeah. It's so rare that the public gets to interact with high-profile senior officials like the Secretary of State. Thank you so much for your work to make this statement directly to him. It's really important that people be confronted with this, especially at places that are so important to the foreign policy apparatus like Georgetown University. So now that you've graduated, what's next for you?
In terms of future plans, I hope to go to law school. I think that a legal understanding of the American system, but also the global system, is important, not because I think like the law is going to liberate Palestine or anyone really, but I think it's important to know how these systems work. And I think doing harm reduction when it comes to the law is important. I mentioned earlier my interest in like digital rights. Like, this is a terrain that Palestinian Americans and Arab Americans and Muslims more broadly could really use support in. Like, it's actually mind-blowing to think that the Patriot Act is informing a lot of decisions made by tech companies, and that something as big as intangible material support for terrorism is getting 20-year-old Palestinian college students like home visits from the FBI. Like, I think that's an important like field that Palestinians and their allies should work in. And so for that reason, I'm excited to go to law school at some point. But I can't predict the future, but what I do know for sure is that like this issue will continue to be so important for me on a personal level. Like, it's impossible to just like have a normal life when you've seen the refugee camp that your father open and you see your family members overseas who will literally never go to Palestine again because of Israel's apartheid system that doesn't even allow visits to Palestine. It's like very difficult to absorb all of that. It's also difficult to see, it's difficult to see like people of my generation like continue to be punished for expressing Palestinian existence in whatever way they may choose to do that. And so all I know is like Palestine will continue to be on my radar. It really is the compass that like grounds me in all of the work that I do. And I encourage folks who took away anything from the video of me or the photos of my peers and I or our statement. I just encourage folks to do something. You can do something on an individual level. You can actually confront American officials. They don't need to be the Secretary of State. I actually was born and raised in New Hampshire, or I was raised in New Hampshire. I was born in New Jersey, but I lived most of my life in New Hampshire, which is a pretty irrelevant state. But guess what? Palestine is there too. You would be surprised how even the most like what seemed to be, irrelevant American states actually have some sort of involvement or some level of complicity in Israeli occupation. So you too can like talk to those elected officials. You should make their life hell. You should literally pin them down wherever you see them in public and question them on their stances and get them on the record for their stances. You should be working for the BDS movement, literally in any capacity. Like BDS is so bare minimum at this point. It's truly like mind blowing to me that more people don't just wake up and say, I care about Palestinian rights. Let me, boycott these products or find a way to get my university or my company to like divest from these products. And there's also the question of social media, which a lot of people, I actually don't claim to be an activist, nor do I claim that like my Twitter account is in any way, shape, or form activism. It is true that social media, when it comes to the Palestinian question, makes a difference. And we saw this in Sheikh Jarrah, and we continue to see this. So if there's just like one thing I hope people take away from everything that has happened, it's like, don't lose sight of the end goal and do what you can, even if what you think you're doing is so small. No one is saying that like your protest in front of the Israeli embassy or your Twitter like retweet or you not buying Pillsbury. No one is saying that's going to free Palestine in and of itself. But combined with so many other factors, combined with so many other small actions from other people who care, it will make a difference. And I truly do believe that we are going to live through seeing sanctions placed on Israel. And I think that Palestine will be liberated within our lifetime. It's just a question of how much work is everyone willing to put in to make that point in time come sooner.
That's a perfect place to end. Nooran Alhamdan, thank you so much for joining us today on the Mondo Weiss podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to our show, a production of mondoweiss.net. The music is from Sound of Picture. Visit our site to sign up for free daily and weekly newsletters on Palestine, Israel, and related U.S. politics. If you're enjoying our podcast, please consider becoming a donor by visiting mondoweiss.net/donate. Mondo Weiss is a nonprofit publication, and every donation of any amount helps sustain our work. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen, and please leave a rating and review to help other listeners find our show.